Say it again, Chase Parker said, his voice low enough to make the whole classroom fall silent. But this time, do not pretend you do not mean it. My fingers tightened around the paper script until the edges bent against my palms. 28 students sat frozen in Professor Harper's communication class, their desks pushed back to make room for our ridiculous couples roleplay assignment. But in that moment, it did not feel like an assignment anymore. It felt like someone had opened a door inside my chest and let every secret I had buried for 2 years step into the light. Chase stood only 3 feet away from me, tall, calm, impossibly beautiful in that effortless way popular alphas always seem to be, with pale skin, dark blonde hair falling neatly over his forehead, and blue eyes that looked cold until they looked at you too long. Then they felt like winter sunlight, bright enough to hurt. I was supposed to read the next line. That was all. 1 sentence. A fake argument between fake boyfriends for a fake class scenario about emotional honesty. But my throat had locked up because the line on the page was something I had never dared to say out loud, not even alone in my dorm room at midnight. Maybe I was stupid for loving someone who only looks at me when no one else is watching. The words blurred in front of me. Somewhere near the back row, someone gave a nervous laugh, but it died quickly when Chase did not look away from me. He did not smile. He did not play it off. He did not turn to the professor and ask to restart the scene. He just waited, like he already knew the truth and was giving me one final chance to stop hiding from it. My scent blocker itched beneath the cuff of my gray hoodie, a tiny medicated patch I had pressed onto my wrist that morning before walking across campus. I had used blockers since freshman year, not because I was ashamed of being an Omega, but because college was easier when no one could read your panic in the air. Easier when no alpha noticed the way your pulse jumped. Easier when Chase Parker walked into a room and your whole body did something humiliating and hopeful before your brain could stop it. I had promised myself this class would be ordinary. Take notes, avoid eye contact, survive another hour. Then Professor Harper shook a glass jar full of folded names and announced we would be paired randomly for a graded role play on romantic conflict. I remember praying for anyone but him. Ryan Brooks, maybe. Madison Hale. Literally anyone in that room. Then I opened my slip of paper and saw Chase Parker written in black ink. I thought that would be the worst thing that happened to me that week. I was wrong. Because 24 hours later, standing under the bright fluorescent lights with Chase staring at me like the script had become a confession, I realized the worst thing was not being paired with my crush. The worst thing was discovering he might have been waiting for this too. I used to think invisibility was a skill, something you could practice until it became part of your body. By sophomore year at Westbridge University, I had almost perfected it. I knew which sidewalks Chase Parker never used between classes, which table in the dining hall gave me a clear view of the exits, and exactly how long I could look at him before my face gave me away. 3 seconds was safe. 4 seconds was dangerous. 5 seconds made my heart do something foolish and loud. That morning, 24 hours before everything changed, I sat in the last row of Professor Harper's classroom with my gray hoodie sleeves pulled over my wrists, pretending to highlight Chapter 6, while secretly watching Chase take his usual seat near the windows. Sunlight cut across his desk in pale gold stripes, catching in his dark blonde hair and making him look like the main character in a story I had no business entering. He wore a navy Westbridge lacrosse jacket, though he had stopped playing after a shoulder injury last semester, and he had that quiet alpha confidence that made people move around him without being asked. He did not have to be loud. He did not have to demand attention. The room simply gave it to him. I pressed my thumb against the scent blocker under my sleeve, checking the edge the way I always did when he was near. Vanilla, snow, and nervousness. That was what my natural scent became when I lost control, and the last thing I needed was for half the class to realize the invisible Omega in the back row had a hopeless crush on the most untouchable alpha on campus. Chase glanced back once, so quickly I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Our eyes met for less than a second. I dropped my gaze so fast my highlighter rolled off the desk and hit the floor. The sound felt enormous. A few students turned. My ears burned. Before I could lean down, a hand reached from the aisle and picked it up. Ryan Brooks smiled at me as he set it on my notebook. Ryan was another alpha, taller than most, with sandy brown hair, a friendly grin, and the kind of easy confidence that made everyone think he was harmless even when he was not. Careful, Ethan, he said softly. At this rate, your school supplies are trying to escape before midterms. I gave a tiny laugh because I did not know what else to do. Across the room, Chase's pencil stopped moving. I noticed because noticing Chase was practically a second heartbeat for me. Professor Harper clapped her hands then, bright and cheerful in the way teachers sounded right before ruining your life. She announced that our next assignment would be a couples communication role play, worth 20% of our grade. The class groaned, laughed, whispered. I went cold. Then she lifted the glass jar of folded names, and somehow, before my name was even called, I felt the future tilt toward me. Professor Harper made the assignment sound harmless, almost cute, as if asking two students to pretend to be a couple in front of the class was the same as asking us to compare notes on a textbook chapter. The goal is emotional clarity, she said, walking between the rows with the glass jar tucked against her cardigan. You will be given a relationship conflict scenario, and you and your partner must demonstrate active listening, honest expression, and repair after misunderstanding. People laughed. Someone near the windows whispered that this was cheaper than therapy. I tried to smile like everyone else, but my stomach felt like it had dropped through the floor. One by one, Professor Harper drew names and paired students together. Madison Hill got Jonah Price. Ryan Brooks got Lily Adams, which made half the room cheer because Ryan bowed dramatically like he had just been cast in a Broadway show. I almost relaxed. Almost. Then Professor Harper unfolded the next slip and said, Ethan Miller. My name sounded strange in her bright classroom voice. Too loud, too visible. I lifted my hand halfway, even though she already knew where I sat. She reached into the jar again. The paper made a small scratching sound as she opened it. Chase Parker. The room changed before I did. A few students turned around. Someone made a soft, teasing sound under their breath. Ryan looked back at me with raised eyebrows, his smile fading into something more curious. My fingers went numb around my highlighter. Chase did not move at first. He just looked down at his desk, then slowly turned his head toward me. For one impossible second, I thought I saw surprise in his eyes, not annoyance, not embarrassment, but something sharp and quickly hidden. Then his face went calm again. Of course it did. Chase Parker was famous for that calm. I was the one whose pulse was running a marathon while sitting completely still. Professor Harper handed us our scenario sheet after class, and I kept my eyes on the carpet as I walked to the front. Chase reached it at the same time. Our shoulders almost brushed. Almost was enough. The clean scent of cedarwood and cold rain slipped past my blocker, faint but unmistakable, and my heart answered before my brain could stop it. Looks like you two got the serious one, Professor Harper said. A long-term couple having their first honest conversation after one partner feels unseen. I wanted the floor to open under me. Chase took the paper before I could, scanned it, and said nothing. That silence hurt more than any complaint would have. I forced myself to laugh quietly. Sorry, I said, because apologizing was easier than standing there being unwanted. We can keep it simple. I know this is probably weird. Chase looked at me then, really looked, his blue eyes steady enough to pin me in place. Why would it be weird, he asked. I had no answer that did not expose me completely. Because I have liked you since freshman year. Because I remember the umbrella you forgot. Because sometimes when you walk into class, I forget how to breathe normally. Instead, I shrugged and stared at the paper between us. Chase folded it once, carefully, like it mattered. We should rehearse somewhere quiet, he said. Tomorrow after 6. Library, 3rd floor. Then he walked away before I could ask whether he was doing this for the grade or because some part of him actually wanted to be alone with me. The 3rd floor of the Westbridge Library always smelled like old paper, lemon cleaner, and rain trapped in wool coats. It was the quietest place on campus after 6, especially on a Thursday, when most students had already escaped to the dining hall or the student center. I arrived 12 minutes early because my nerves would not let me arrive on time like a normal person. I chose a table near the tall windows overlooking the quad, where the last orange light of evening stretched across the brick paths and bare maple trees. My script sat in front of me, already wrinkled from the number of times I had folded and unfolded it in my dorm room. The scenario was simple on paper. One partner felt invisible. The other had been emotionally distant. They had to talk without blaming each other. They had to listen. They had to decide whether the relationship was worth saving. Simple, Professor Harper had said. Educational, she had said. She had not said anything about how every line would feel like it had been stolen from the most private corner of my heart. I pressed my thumb against the blocker under my sleeve and checked the time again. 6 o'clock exactly. Then Chase appeared at the end of the aisle, carrying 2 coffees from the library cafe, like this was ordinary, like my entire body had not forgotten how to function. He wore a black sweater instead of his lacrosse jacket, and somehow that made him look less untouchable and more dangerous to my self-control, because it was easier to imagine him as a person and not a campus legend. "I did not know what you liked," he said, setting 1 cup in front of me. "So I got hot chocolate. You had one last week." I stared at the cup. He remembered. That. Chase Parker remembered something I drank on a random Tuesday. "Thank you," I managed. My voice came out too soft. He sat across from me, opened his copy of the script, and looked down before I could look away first. "We should read it once without acting," he said, "just to understand the scene." I nodded, grateful for rules, for structure, for anything that could keep me from floating apart. We began with the easy lines, the greetings, the awkward opening. Then the script shifted. My character had to say, "You make everyone else feel important, but when we are alone, you act like I am something you regret choosing." My mouth went dry. Chase stopped moving. Outside, a group of students laughed somewhere on the quad, distant and careless. I forced myself to read the line, but my voice cracked on the word regret. Chase's eyes lifted from the page. For once, he did not look calm. He looked almost wounded. "Again," he said quietly. I swallowed. "Why?" "Because you said it like you were apologizing for feeling it." The words slipped under my skin. I tried again, slower this time, but halfway through, Chase answered before I finished. His line was supposed to be, "I did not know you felt that way." Instead, he said, "I noticed you before you thought I did." I froze. My fingers tightened around the cup until the cardboard bent. "That is not in the script," I whispered. Chase looked at the paper between us, then back at me. "No," he said, "it is not." For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The library was so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the heating vents above the shelves and the faint tap of rain beginning against the windows. Chase had said he noticed me, and somehow that was worse than if he had said nothing at all, because hope was a dangerous thing when it came from someone like him. "What do you mean?" I asked, but my voice barely reached across the table. Chase looked down at his script, his thumb tracing the folded corner like he needed something ordinary to hold on to. "You sit in the back row," he said. "You use blue highlighters for definitions and yellow for examples. You walk the long way around the student center when the lacrosse team is outside. You drink hot chocolate when it rains. You think no one sees you because you are careful, but careful is still visible if someone is looking." My chest tightened so suddenly I forgot to breathe. No one had ever described me like that, not as invisible, not as weak, but as if every small habit I thought I had hidden had become proof that I existed. I wanted to ask why he had been looking, but fear caught the question before it reached my mouth. I lowered my eyes to the script. "We should keep practicing," I said, because running away with words was the only kind of running I could do while sitting still. Chase was quiet for a moment, then nodded. We continued, but everything had changed. The fake argument no longer felt like a class assignment. Each line became a narrow bridge, and every time I stepped onto it, Chase met me halfway. When I read, "I am tired of being brave enough for both of us," his jaw tightened. When he answered, "I thought distance would make it easier to protect you." He sounded so serious that my hands started to tremble. I was about to ask if that line was real too when footsteps approached from the aisle. "Well, this looks intense," Ryan Brooks said, leaning casually against the end of our table with a paper cup in one hand and a grin that did not quite reach his eyes. I almost jumped. Chase did not. He only looked up slowly, his expression returning to that calm, polished surface everyone else knew. Ryan glanced at our scripts. Professor Harper paired me with Lily, but she already left for work. I figured I would find the honor students and steal some inspiration. He turned his smile on me. "How is Chase as a fake boyfriend, Ethan? Too emotionally unavailable, or just unavailable enough for realism?" My face went hot. "We are just rehearsing." "Relax," Ryan said, softer now. "I am teasing." He moved closer, reaching for the loose page beside my elbow. "Here, if your scene needs more tension, try standing closer during the confession. The audience needs to believe there is history." His fingers brushed the paper near my hand. Harmless, Barely anything. But Chase's scent shifted in the air, cedarwood sharpening like cold rain. Before a storm, Ryan noticed. I noticed. The whole table seemed to notice. Chase placed his palm flat over the script before Ryan could pick it up. "That scene is not in your assignment," he said. Ryan lifted both hands with an easy laugh. "Got it." Territorial about grades. Very academic. But his eyes flicked from Chase to me, curious and bright. I should have felt embarrassed. Instead, I felt the strange, impossible warmth of Chase moving his chair a few inches closer to mine, not touching me, not claiming anything out loud, but placing himself between me and the rest of the room, as if the roleplay had already become something he intended to protect. By the time presentation day arrived, I had rewritten our scene in my head so many times that the real words no longer felt attached to the paper. They followed me across campus that Friday morning, through the cold air, past the brick dorms and the yellow school buses unloading students for a campus tour, all the way to Professor Harper's classroom on the second floor of Caldwell Hall. My blocker felt secure under my sleeve, but I still checked it every few minutes, pressing the edge down until my wrist ached. I told myself it was because of the grade. I told myself my hands were cold because the temperature had dropped overnight. I told myself Chase Parker had only moved closer in the library because Ryan had interrupted our practice, not because anything between us had changed. But when I walked into class and saw Chase already standing near the front, holding both copies of our script, every lie I had built collapsed at once. He looked up before I said anything, as if he had been waiting for the sound of my footsteps. "You are early," he said. "So are you," I answered. It was not clever, but it was all my nervous heart could manage. A faint smile touched his mouth, gone almost before I could believe in it. "I wanted to make sure you did not have to stand up here alone." That sentence should have been harmless. It was not. It settled in my chest with a warmth I did not know what to do with. Students filled the room quickly, loud with Friday energy, backpacks thudding against chairs, iced coffees sweating on desks, phones appearing and disappearing under notebooks. Ryan came in with Lily Adams, gave me a small salute, and then glanced at Chase with obvious amusement. Chase ignored him, but the air around him tightened in a way I was starting to recognize. Professor Harper called the room to order and reminded everyone that the purpose of the exercise was empathy, not performance. I almost laughed at that, because performance was the only thing keeping me upright. 2 pairs went before us. Madison cried convincingly during her scene, and Jonah forgot half his lines but recovered with enough charm that everyone clapped. Then Professor Harper smiled at us. "Ethan and Chase, whenever you are ready." My legs felt strange as I walked to the center of the room, like the floor had become the length of a football field. Chase stood across from me, close enough that I could see the tiny crease between his brows. The classroom lights hummed above us. Someone whispered my name. I looked down at the script, but the first line blurred, so Chase spoke first, steady and low. "You have been avoiding me." It was his line, but it did not sound like acting. I forced myself to answer. "Maybe I got tired of waiting for you to notice." A few students shifted in their seats. The room softened at the edges until there was only him. Chase stepped closer. I noticed everything. My breath caught. That was not the line. Again, that was not the line. I should have stopped. I should have looked at Professor Harper and asked to restart. Instead, I read the sentence that had terrified me since the night before. "Maybe I was stupid for loving you." Silence fell so completely that even the heating vents seemed to pause. Chase stared at me, and for the first time since I had known him, his calm broke in front of everyone. "No," he said, folding his script once and lowering it to his side. "I was stupid for making you think you were alone." For one impossible second, I forgot that the classroom existed. I forgot Professor Harper standing beside her desk with her grading rubric. I forgot Ryan in the second row, Lily beside him, Madison with her hand half lifted to her mouth. I forgot the fluorescent lights, the whiteboard covered in communication terms, and the 26 other students who had just heard Chase Parker say something that sounded far too real to belong in a class assignment. All I could see was him. Chase stood 3 feet away from me with the folded script hanging from his hand, his blue eyes fixed on mine as if the rest of the world had become background noise. My own script trembled so badly the pages made a soft fluttering sound. I tried to remember the next line, but there was no next line for what had just happened. The scene had left the page. "Chase," I whispered, and his name came out like a warning. like a question, like the beginning of a confession I was not brave enough to finish. His expression softened, not in the polished way people softened for an audience, but in a quiet, helpless way that made my chest ache. "I know," he said. "We are supposed to keep going." A nervous laugh moved through the room, but it faded quickly when Chase did not smile. Professor Harper took one careful step forward. "Mr. Parker, Mr. Miller, are you both comfortable continuing?" Comfortable was such a strange word for the way my heart was shaking apart. I nodded because stopping would make everyone stare harder, and because some reckless part of me wanted to know what Chase would say next if the script no longer protected either of us. I looked down and found my place with effort. The next line belonged to me. "Then why did you keep acting like I was invisible?" My voice was thin at first, but the last word came out clearer, sharper, more mine than the words before it. Chase inhaled slowly. I saw the movement in his shoulders. I saw his fingers tighten around the paper. "Because every time I looked at you," he said, no longer pretending to read, "I wanted to walk closer. And I did not know if you would want me there." The room went completely still. Heat rose behind my eyes, and I hated it. Hated how easily kindness could undo me after years of preparing for rejection. My wrist began to itch beneath my sleeve, a small burning line where the blocker had been pressed too tightly all morning. I ignored it. I had ignored worse. "You never asked," I said. Chase stepped closer, slow enough that I could have moved away. "I did not. I am asking now." The words hit me so gently that they hurt. My heartbeat surged, fast and bright, and the patch under my sleeve loosened with a tiny pull against my skin. A cool draft from the classroom vent slipped over my wrist. Then the medicated edge peeled back, and the first warm trace of vanilla and snow entered the air. The scent slipped out before I could stop it, soft at first, almost delicate, like warm vanilla rising from a cup of cocoa and the clean bite of snow on a winter morning. For half a second, I hoped no one would notice. Then Ryan's head turned. Madison went still. Someone in the back row whispered, "Omega," with the kind of surprise that made the word feel much louder than it was. My stomach dropped. The classroom that had felt too silent before suddenly felt enormous. Every desk, every phone, every pair of eyes pulling me apart without anyone even standing up. I grabbed my sleeve and pressed it hard over my wrist, but the blocker had already peeled halfway loose. Its medicated edge curled uselessly against my skin. Panic made the scent warmer, brighter, impossible to hide. I hated that most of all. I hated that my body could tell the room what my mouth had spent years refusing to say. Professor Harper reacted first, her voice calm but firm as she stepped toward the front row. "Everyone, remain seated. Give him space." It was the right thing to say, but the room was full of alphas and betas and startled curiosity, and my instincts did not understand school rules or professional calm. They only understood exposure. I took one step back. The back of my leg hit the edge of a desk. My script fell from my hand, pages scattering across the floor like white birds. Ryan stood halfway, not threatening, not unkind, just concerned in that immediate alpha way that made my pulse spike harder. "Ethan, are you okay?" he asked. I knew he meant well. I knew that. But Chase moved before I could answer. He did not shove, did not raise his voice, did not turn the room into a scene. He simply stepped between me and everyone else, tall and steady, his cedarwood and rain scent, settling over the sharp edge of my fear like a closed door against the cold. "Sit down, Ryan," he said quietly. Ryan froze, then slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Chase did not look away from me. "Can I stand here?" he asked, so softly that only I could hear it clearly. That question nearly broke me. Not the scent, not the staring, not the embarrassment, but the fact that he asked. I nodded once. Chase took off his navy lacrosse jacket and held it out, not touching me until I reached for it myself. The fabric was warm from his shoulders, clean with his scent, and when I pulled it around me, the room stopped feeling like a stage and started feeling survivable. "No one records this," Chase said, his voice still level, but something in it made several phones disappear under desks. Professor Harper nodded immediately. "Phones away. Now." My face burned, and I stared at the floor because I could not bear to see what anyone thought of me. Then Chase crouched, gathered my fallen script pages, and placed them gently back in my hands. "You do not have to finish the scene," he said. "Not for a grade. Not for anyone." I looked at him over the collar of his jacket, surrounded by my own ruined secret and his impossible calm. But you said all that in front of everyone, I whispered. His eyes softened again, because hiding it was starting to feel like lying. The classroom blurred around us, but this time it was not from panic. It was from the dizzy, terrifying realization that Chase Parker was not ashamed to stand in front of me. He was choosing to. Professor Harper ended the presentation for us with the gentlest authority I had ever heard, the kind of calm that did not ask for attention because it already had the whole room in its hands. She told the class to take 5 minutes, told Madison to open the windows, told Ryan to walk to the vending machine with Lily and bring back bottled water like it was an official assignment, something practical enough to keep everyone from staring too long at the disaster still hanging in the air. Everyone obeyed because no one knew what else to do. Chairs scraped. Someone whispered and was immediately silent. Madison crossed the room with pale cheeks, and Ryan left so quickly he almost forgot his backpack. I stood there in Chase's jacket, holding my crumpled script, feeling as if I had stepped out of my own life and into someone else's story, one where the secret I had protected for years had been dragged into the light by a torn little patch in my hand. My blocker was ruined in my palm, useless now, its adhesive curled at the edge, a small thing that had somehow exposed everything I was. Chase stayed beside me, not too close, never trapping me, never making the mistake of treating his protection like ownership, but close enough that his calm reached me before the room could. Do you want to leave? He asked, so quietly that only I could hear him. I nodded because my voice had disappeared, because if I opened my mouth, I was afraid something broken would come out instead of words. Professor Harper did not ask questions. She only placed a hall pass on the desk and said, "Take the time you need, Ethan." And the way she said my name made my throat ache because she did not say Omega, did not say problem, did not say scandal. She said Ethan, like I was still myself. The hallway outside Caldwell Hall felt colder than the classroom, bright with afternoon sun and the echo of lockers closing somewhere downstairs. I walked fast until I found the stairwell at the end of the corridor, the quiet one students used when they wanted to avoid the main entrance, the one where every sound seemed smaller and safer. Only then did my knees finally give up pretending they were strong. I sat on the second step, still wrapped in Chase's jacket, and pressed both hands over my face. The concrete beneath me felt cold through my jeans. My breathing came too shallow, too quick, and I hated that my body still knew how to panic even after the worst had already happened. I expected Chase to leave me there. He had already done more than anyone could have expected. He had already stepped in front of the class, already made himself part of the story people would repeat, already risked whatever careful distance he had always kept around himself. Instead, the stairwell door opened softly a few seconds later, and his footsteps stopped on the landing below me. "I will go if you want me to," he said. I lowered my hands. His face was careful, almost afraid, which looked wrong on someone everyone thought was fearless, wrong on Chase Parker, who moved through campus like nothing could touch him. Was any of it real? I asked. The question came out rough and small, scraped raw by humiliation and hope. Chase looked up at me, one hand resting on the stair rail. All of it. My breath caught. Even before the role play? Before the class, he said. Before this semester. I changed my schedule because I saw your name on the roster. The world seemed to pause around that sentence. Somewhere beyond the stairwell, campus moved on with its ordinary Friday sounds, sneakers on tile, distant laughter, a cart rolling over uneven concrete outside. But inside me, everything had gone still. Why would you do that? I whispered. Chase gave a quiet, helpless laugh with no humor in it, like the answer had been living inside him for too long. Because freshman year, I lent an umbrella to an Omega outside the science building, and he looked at me like I had handed him the moon. My eyes burned again. He remembered. Not vaguely, not by accident. He remembered the beginning the same way I did. The rain, the soaked sleeves, the way I had been trying to disappear under the building awning. The black umbrella suddenly offered without questions, without judgment, without that sharp look people gave when they realized what I was. I had carried that memory like a secret kindness for years, telling myself it meant more to me than it ever could have meant to him. But Chase was standing below me now, telling me he had kept it too. I was about to answer when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Then his buzzed too. Then mine again. A cold thread of fear moved through me as I pulled it out. The Westbridge campus group chat had exploded. Messages blurred together too quickly to read, names and question marks and shocks spilling over one another. At the top was a short video clip from class, posted before Professor Harper ordered the phones away. The caption read, "Chase Parker just protected Ethan Miller in front of everyone." My stomach turned over. It was not only the classroom anymore. It was the dorms, the cafeteria, the lecture halls, the people who barely knew me and would suddenly think they knew the most private part of me. Chase climbed 2 steps, close enough now for me to see his reflection in my dark screen, but still careful not to crowd me. "Ethan," he said softly. I looked up, terrified of what tomorrow would become. Chase did not look terrified. He looked decided, as if something inside him had finally stopped running. "They are going to talk," I said, barely breathing. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. "Then let them talk about the truth." "What truth?" Chase held my gaze, steady and warm and impossible to hide from. "That I chose you before they knew. That I am choosing you now. And that I am done letting you stand alone just because I was afraid." My phone buzzed again, but for once I did not look down. Chase did not look terrified. He looked decided. "Then tomorrow," he said. "I stopped pretending.